I'm having a hard time believing it's already been 4 years since the release of the RTX 3080. You can currently find one of these used for a little over $350, and as you might have seen in the cinematic teaser, I recently had the chance to get my hands on one and thought we would check it out. The RTX 3080 has 10GB of GDDR6 memory, a 320-bit memory bus, and 8704 shading units. Now, I'm sure some of you might be thinking that you're better off getting a brand new card for that amount of money, but no, you're not. The 7800 XT as well as the 4070 are the cards you want to go for if you want to get similar performance of the RTX 3080, yet those cards are priced in the range of $500 to $600. So by going with the 3080, you're essentially getting the same performance with a nearly $200 discount, of course with the only caveat being the lack of warranty. For the specs, we have a Ryzen 5 5600, a B450 Tomahawk motherboard, 32GB of DDR4 3200 megatransfer memory, and a 700-watt power supply. Latest drivers were used at the time of testing. Both temperature and power limits have been maxed out in MSI Afterburner. Unfortunately, resizable bar was disabled since it turns out enabling it isn't as simple as it is with AMD, but it is something you can do through a third-party software. And finally, the Windows power plan has been set to ultimate performance. Given this is a relatively powerful graphics card, I thought I would test it at 1440p, so keep in mind that you can always drop to a lower resolution for better performance. Let's kick things off with the most recent title, Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which our 3080 handles pretty good using high settings at 1440p, with rare drops below 60 frames in some areas. The stuttering that you're seeing on the frame time graph has nothing to do with the GPU, by the way. I tried everything to get rid of it, but it turns out this game is just poorly optimized. Using the low preset, the game runs noticeably better thanks to a higher frame rate and a slight reduction in frame time spikes, so I would recommend setting the preset to medium for the best experience at this resolution.
Senator's orders. This way. We're taking a detour.
Hungry Klatooinians. Ooh, you don't want that. Remind me to tell you about the Corita job sometime. Looks like that factory's...
Hogwarts Legacy mainly runs in the range of 80 to 100 frames using high settings at 1440p. There is some movement in the frame time in detailed areas, though honestly I found the game to be totally playable. Enabling ray tracing does result in a noticeable decrease in performance, which is something that can be mitigated by dropping the resolution or lowering a few settings. Also keep in mind that we get slightly CPU bound in this game in detailed areas, so if you're going to pair this card with a faster processor, you're going to get a higher frame rate in areas like Hogsmeade. Apex Legends runs really well at 1440p using high settings, although there is some odd behavior that I was unable to fix. Once again, for the most part, it runs great. The frame rate mostly stays above 150s with drops below 110 frames under intensive scenarios, but there were moments when the frame rate would suddenly tank and stay there for about 10 seconds, even when there was nothing happening, which is something I only experienced with this card out of dozens that I tested. Another thing that I noticed are these near constant frame time spikes, which thankfully aren't noticeable thanks to the high frame rate, yet once again this is not something that I've ever experienced with any other GPU that I tested. Other than that though, the game is playable 99% of the time. Cyberpunk 2077 runs really well at 1440p using ultra settings with medium crowd density, with it mostly hovering between 55 to 65 frames. Enabling ray tracing does result in a noticeable drop in frame rate at this resolution, so if you want to play this game with ray tracing enabled, I would suggest dropping the resolution since the frame rate gets nearly doubled at 1080p. Spider-Man Remastered runs flawlessly on our RTX 3080 at 1440p using the very high preset. Even with ray tracing enabled, the game is perfectly playable. Do keep in mind that this is another game on our list where we're CPU bound, as you can see by the GPU utilization, so with a faster processor you're going to get an even higher frame rate.
Got an armed robbery in progress. Incident is ongoing in the West Village.
God of War is another game that our $350 card has no issues running at 1440p Ultra. The frame rate mainly hovers between low 80s to high 90s, with extremely rare drops to low 70s.
You live in a tree?
Not in it. Below it. Emily!
Look! It's alright.
There is not much to say when it comes to Forza Horizon 5. Using the extreme preset at 1440p, the game runs flawlessly, and I never saw it dip below 90 frames. Warzone 2 runs perfectly fine for the most part at 1440p Ultra, although the graphics card does seem to struggle in certain situations using this preset. And unfortunately, this is nothing new. Nvidia GPUs have had frame time issues in Call of Duty games for a very long time. For example, driving around specific parts of the city or running inside some buildings results in noticeable stuttering for some reason, and while using the low preset doesn't completely alleviate this problem, it definitely makes the game much more fluid, so you might want to stick to the low preset. For our final game, we have Dying Light 2, which is another title where I came across some odd behavior, at least with default in-game settings. As you can see on the frame time graph, the frame rate pretty much constantly jumps around regardless of where we are on the map and which graphics settings we use. Simply put, it feels like the game is speeding up and slowing down. I even tried a different driver version to no avail. When it comes to ray tracing though, both at 1080p and 1440p, the frame time is smooth, and it turns out the reason for that is DirectX 12, which the game switches to from DX 11 when you enable ray tracing. Basically, for the best experience, what you have to do here is switch from DX 11 to 12 and enable asynchronous compute, which delivers a higher frame rate and a much more stable frame time compared to DX11. Temps-wise, this card is good. At a 70% fan speed in a 19 degrees Celsius room, the GPU and hotspot temps do not exceed 70 and 80 degrees respectively. The total system power consumption under full load mostly stays under 550 watts, so with a setup like this, you want to have at least a 700 watt power supply. For $350, I think this card provides great value and is much better compared to what you can get brand new. Not only is it a great 1440p gaming GPU, but also a very capable productivity card if you're into video editing, 3D, and so on. 10 gigabytes also seems to be enough, at least in the titles that we tested. I know there are games out there where you will hit a VRAM limit if you max out all the settings at 1440p, yet if you're okay with lowering a few settings, you'll be fine. For a similar price, you can get an RX 6800 XT, which we will be comparing our 3080 to in one of my upcoming videos, but by going with an AMD card, you do lose some features such as better ray tracing as well as productivity performance. And when it comes to gaming results, well, that's something we're gonna find out in the comparison. Or you can watch a comparison from a different channel, there are plenty of them out there. Anyways, that's been it. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.